Well, good morning or good afternoon, whenever this video hits you. We are in the middle of our coronavirus situation where we are dealing with the many things that come with that, social distancing, everything else. So to kind of keep you going, to keep you in the loop, to keep you on track and able to get some spiritual food, one of the things I wanted to do was record a series of videos that are going to talk about the nature of God, who He is, what He's done, and just some general things about His nature and His person. So each day, we're going to try to take on one particular facet of what it means to be God. This all kind of comes from a quote from A.W. Tozer. I'm actually paraphrasing him, and he would say that what a person thinks about God is the most important thing about him. Now I'm paraphrasing Tozer here. Tozer was a pastor in Chicago when he made that quote. He was a leader in the evangelical movement back in the 1950s, and an important kind of figure when it comes towards religion and just the history of Christianity in America. But God can sometimes feel like, for many of us, a mysterious stranger, and it's also kind of like a near family member. Like we have these kind of corresponding things. On the one hand, He seems really strange that we don't really know Him all that well, but then on the other hand, we have an experience with God where we feel like we really get to know Him, and that we really understand Him. But it's kind of a confusing. So can we know God? Can we not know God? What's He like? And who exactly is He in His nature and what He does? Some of us have God neat and tidy in a box, right? We think that God does little to interfere with our lives. He maybe doesn't get all that engaged with us. He's just kind of distinct and separate from His creation, not all that involved with us right now. And sometimes He comes and helps us, maybe when we are in a difficulty and need. Um, many others even think that they know who God is and have a definition of God that's very small, uh, that is very incomplete. And perhaps they just latch on to one or two different parts of God, say His love, and forget about something else like His justice. Perhaps that might be some of you out there as well, that we have a very incomplete view of God. Others of us just kind of dream up a God that we are comfortable with. We don't. We like a God who is tame and tidy, who fits within our preconceived framework, who we happen to like, and that's the God that we choose to worship and to love. So when we're going to be going through these series of videos, in order to kind of go through these videos, we're going to start with two assumptions. Um, Now we're just introducing this today. Tomorrow we'll start looking at a particular attribute. We're just going to have two assumptions as we begin to talk about God. The first thing is this: is that there is a God who is there. There's a God who is there. Francis Schaeffer used that term. What he meant, and what I am meaning by that, is that there is a real God who exists apart from us. He is not us. We don't control Him. He is not in somehow subservient to us. But we are created to serve God. But He is independent and Himself apart from us. There is a real God who exists, who is out there, and is apart from us. He is not inside of us, right? He is not inside of us per se. We'll get into the Holy Spirit later. But anyway, the point being is that we have a real God who who is distinct from us. Uh, God is not subject to our own definitions and our own preconceptions and comfortability. There is a God, a person that is out there that is independent, who He is with or without us. Part of the problem is that we think that we can define God on our own terms. For example, some individuals may say things like, "To me, God is like dot 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 dot," or "God, my God wouldn't do that," or "To me, God would never send people to hell. To me, God is the kind of person who's like a grandfather or a policeman or something like that." So they're trying to define God according to their own terminology, to their own uh, vision on who they believe God happens to be. See, God exists apart from humanity and does not need for us to define Him. We don't imagine God. We rather are to investigate and discover the God who is there, the God who is outside of us, the God who is real, not the God of our imaginations. So that's the whole point, is that we want to discover if God, there is a God who is there, a real God. And if that's the case, we want to know who that real God is. We want to make sure that we know the real God, not the imaginary God that we might dream up. So we need to investigate and figure out who is that real God who is there, not the God that we are trying to make for ourselves. Unfortunately, I think a lot of us try to make God fit our preconceived prejudices or preferences. So, for example, somebody might go, "Well, I think that God could also be female," or "Oh, well, I think that my God is not really all that mean spirited as to send people to hell, or maybe it's to me, God is not really all that concerned with how we worship. It's all about the heart." So there's lots of statements that people make about God that are mistaken because they are in their own imaginations, in their own subjectivity, and not really trying to think about the real and true God who is outside of us. So that's the first assumption we're going to make, is that there is a God who is there, a real God who we can discover. That's the second part. Is this God who is there has revealed himself. See, God did not have to communicate to us who he is. He could have created the whole world and stepped back and let things go. Theoretically, he could have done that, but God chose to reveal himself. He is a God who wants to be known. So we don't have to stumble in the dark, try to figure out who this God is. Instead, he revealed, he disclosed of himself so that we can receive it and that we can know the God who is there. That disclosure where God talks about himself is what we call the scriptures, what we call the Bible when we read that. It's a revelation that we would not know about God unless he chose to reveal himself to us. So, for example, imagine if you were in a conversation with somebody and all they do is just stare at you blankly. They don't really tell you anything about themselves. Maybe you ask them, "Hey, where are you from? What have you been doing? What do you like? What are some of your hobbies?" And you're trying to get to know this person, but they just sit there and stare at you blankly. Well, it's going to be really hard to know anything about that person, right? Because they got to talk a little bit, they got to speak, they have to make themselves known so that you can know them. And in a similar way, God reveals himself. He tells us who he is, what he's like, what he likes, and what he's engaged with, what it is that makes that brings him honor and glory and worship, things that displease him. So God has to tell us, otherwise we'd be stumbling around in the dark trying to get to know the God who is actually out there. And God is very specific about this. He doesn't leave us any doubt about who he is. We might not fully understand everything about God, which is fine. We'll talk more about that later. But we at least are able to understand a lot of who God is. So one of the ways that we get to know him, of course, as I've been alluding to, is God's disclosure in his word. He has revealed himself. He's told us who he is in his word so that we can have an idea of himself. It's not impossible to know things about God because he chose to make himself known. So a good way to think about this is like when you're looking at the Bible, think of it in some ways it is like, not always, but it's like a love letter in the sense of, so when I was dating my wife, we would write each other letters on occasion or notes. And when I'd receive that note, you'd read it very intently and in-depthly, like why this word, not this word. Why did they address it in this way? Why this particular construction? You'd be really into it, trying to understand the person who's writing that letter because you want to know not just the words that are on the page, but the person behind it. And so when we approach God's word, we're not just approaching it from the standpoint of just reading it for information, but we want to read it in the sense of wanting to know the person who's behind it. So in these videos that we're going to look at in the next, however long we end up having to do this with the coronavirus, there's kind of two main questions that we're going to be looking at. So the first one is this: what is God? So, in other words, when you think of God, or what is his being? What's he like? What's he made of? What does it mean for God to be God? So, this question is interested in God's primary attributes. There are things like God being independent from his creation, God being uh, God being all his omnis in certain ways as well. So there's lots of things about God that are essential to his being, his character. The second question is, what is God like? This is kind of like, supposing we understand what God is, then what's he like? In other words, how does he operate? What's his personality like? So just to kind of help you, it's kind of similar to how we get to know certain people as well. So, for example, if I'm trying to get to know somebody, I don't want to just look and go, oh, there's a human being. Okay, I have to have a certain criteria for a human being in order to understand what a human being is. So, we might have that list of criteria what a human being is, but then we want to know that particular human being. So, in a similar way, we want to know God and what it means for God to be God, but then we also want to know what that God is like. What is his personality like? What are the what's he good at? What is his motivations? So there's kind of two things that we're looking at when we're considering God. Number one, we want to know what God is. What is he composed of? What does it mean for God to be God in his being? And then secondly, what's he like? What's his personality like? What's the things that motivate God? What are the things that drive him in creation? So I hope you are looking forward to getting to know God more in these details. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the in the page down below. We'll see how this works. I'll try to reply to those as best we can, or might address those a little bit later on in later videos. So please comment, subscribe, so that you don't miss one of these videos as we kind of keep on this journey, trying to understand who God is and try to have a better grasp of the identity of God and his character and his person. Hope you're looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to going through this with you guys as well. Hope you guys have a good rest of the time. No matter what it is that is doing. Remember that God is there and that he can be known. So let's spend some time getting to know the God that is there.